Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so we're going to be diving into some truly fascinating linguistic research today. So many people study English for literally years. You're out there mastering these incredibly complex words, things like consequently and furthermore. And yet, despite all that hard work, you still feel kind of unnatural when you speak, right? Well, let's unpack the data and figure out exactly why that disconnect happens.
Picture this. You finally get the chance to talk to a native speaker. You deliver this perfectly constructed sentence packed with advanced vocabulary and nothing. Just an awkward silence. They tilt their head, they pause, and they just look utterly bewildered. It's this moment of profound cognitive dissonance. You realize that your literal translation, even though it was grammatically flawless, completely missed the cultural context of the conversation. And honestly, it's incredibly frustrating to feel like all that studying actually built a barrier instead of a bridge.
But here's the thing, and the research we're exploring today reveals this incredibly validating truth. It is not because your English is bad. Let me just repeat that for you. Your English is not bad. It's simply because it sounds mathematically unnatural to the native ear. You've essentially accidentally wandered into what linguists playfully call the uncanny valley of communication. It's close to human speech, but it's just robotic enough to feel a little bit off. And once we unpack the data on exactly why this happens, your entire approach to speaking is going to change forever.
So, let's kick things off with Section 1, the big word trap. Think about how our academic systems are actually designed. They reward complexity, right? Because they are built to test reading comprehension and formal writing, not daily social survival. If you wrote utilize instead of use, or endeavor instead of try, your teacher gave you top marks for having an advanced vocabulary. You were literally trained to sound like a sophisticated essay. But, real life isn't a school exam. Academic institutions prioritize this formal lexicon and totally ignored the reality that native speakers just do not talk like textbooks in their everyday lives. In fact, linguistic researchers have analyzed massive databases of native speech using things called lexical frequency profiles, and the data they found is pretty staggering. Get this, just the 1,000 most common English words cover over 85% of everything native speakers say in daily conversation. 85%! To put that into perspective for you, Shakespeare had an estimated working vocabulary of over 20,000 words, but modern daily survival, it requires just a tiny fraction of that. So we really have to ask ourselves, why spend years memorizing vast mental databases of complex words when the data clearly shows we're almost never going to use them?
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, written versus spoken English.
This brings us to a really core linguistic insight. You see, linguists distinguish between different registers of language, which is basically just the level of formality we use depending on the situation. Now, written in English and spoken English are technically different registers, but in practice, they operate almost like completely different languages. And the real tragedy of traditional education is that most learners are heavily trained exclusively in that formal written register. But spoken English relies almost entirely on a high-frequency vocabulary of short, simple, and super direct words.
Let's look at a practical example of this. A learner fresh out of the classroom might say something like, "I am experiencing significant difficulties with this situation." And hey, it's grammatically perfect, but a native speaker naturally defaults to, "I'm really struggling with this." The reason the native speaker's version works better actually comes down to a psychological concept called cognitive load. Shorter phrases take significantly less brain power to process in real time. We humans naturally gravitate toward language that requires the lowest cognitive effort during a spoken dialogue. We just want it to be easy. Here's another angle on this. Say a learner is trying to be extremely polite, right? They might ask, "Would you be able to assist me?" But a native speaker prioritizes simple words and just asks, "Can you help me?" This isn't just about sentence length either. It is deeply cultural. In a lot of English-speaking cultures, being overly formal can actually create this unnatural hierarchy. It puts a rigid distance between people. Saying, "Can you help me?" breaks down that barrier and fosters an immediate, relaxed peer-to-peer connection.
And the data points to a really clear pattern across all casual conversations. When a learner says, "I am currently in the process of completing the assignment," a native speaker effortlessly counters with, "I'm working on it." Stripping away that unnecessary complexity isn't a sign of a limited vocabulary. Actually, scratch that, it is literally a defining feature of native fluency. Native speakers intentionally use direct words to make sure that real-time processing is as smooth and frictionless as possible.
Because when you use those big, formal, written English words in a casual setting, you end up sounding like a robot reading a textbook. Think of it like wearing a tuxedo to the beach. Is it a nice outfit? Sure, yeah. Is it completely out of place and making everyone around you feel slightly awkward? Absolutely. People start feeling uncomfortable talking to you,
And it's not because of your grammar or your accent. It's entirely because your word choice just doesn't match the social environment.
All right, so how do we fix this? Let's move on to Section 3, 3 Steps to Fluency. Based on all this linguistic data, researchers and polyglots actually suggest a really simple 3-part framework to rewire your brain for spoken English. Step 1, replace formal words. Step 2, watch real conversations. And Step 3, stop trying to impress. Let's break down exactly how you can actively apply these steps to your daily routine starting right now. So Step 1 requires you to consciously monitor your internal monologue. Every single time you catch your brain reaching for a formal academic word, intentionally pivot to the conversational equivalent. Instead of purchase, train yourself to just say buy. Instead of residence, just say home. Instead of sufficient, use enough. By actively swapping these words in your daily thoughts and casual chats, you begin to retrain your brain's default register. You're actively moving away from that academic stiffness and toward natural ease. Step 2 is a fundamental shift in how you consume media. We need to move away from passive listening and get into active vocabulary mining. When you watch authentic daily media, like casual YouTube vlogs or conversational podcasts, treat them as rich databases of high-frequency words. Don't even worry about parsing the complex grammar right now. Just listen for the surprisingly simple words the hosts choose to express their complex thoughts. You'll quickly see the research playing out in real time right in front of you. Everyday fluency relies heavily on those top 1,000 words. And that brings us to the psychology of communication. The core takeaway from communication experts is beautifully simple, and it's this: clarity beats complexity every single time. The ultimate goal of speaking is friction-free connection. Native speakers aren't sitting there judging your vocabulary size, they're appreciating how easily they can understand your point. Once you let go of the need to show off how many textbook words you know, your conversations are going to become vastly more authentic and engaging. True fluency relies heavily on the illusion of simplicity. The absolute best English speakers in the world make speaking look and sound incredibly easy. But making something sound easy actually requires absolute mastery of the basics. It's a lot like a master musician playing a simple, beautiful melody perfectly without any unnecessary notes. They do it on purpose. They intentionally choose the exact right, clear, natural words to make the listener feel completely at ease. Now, I want to turn this whole thing over to you. Drop the formal word you catch yourself overusing the most down in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more data-driven insights into mastering natural English. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, deeper thought to chew on. If human language was truly invented as a tool to bring us closer together, then why are we so often obsessed with using big, complex words that only build walls between us? Definitely think about that the next time you speak. See you in the next one.